The phone rang just as a raw November wind decided to prove its point. It howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak, ripped the last stubborn leaf from its perch, and sent it skittering across the warped boards of my back porch. I was sitting in my ancient rocking chair, the one that had outlasted 3 dogs, 2 kids, and would likely outlast me. Its tired creak was the only rhythm in my quiet world, a slow, weary, and stubborn beat. A mug of cheap, bitter coffee, my one consistent indulgence, steamed in my hand. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the faint, comforting smell of wood smoke from the Wallace's chimney next door. A signal that evening, and dinner, was approaching. My old Ford F-150, my loyal, rust-colored steed, sat silent in the driveway. The paint was peeling in patches, revealing the primer beneath like old scars. Time was. That truck bed was the stage for my life. I'd hauled bags of cement for the foundation of this very house in it. Hauled 2 kids' bicycles, one with pink streamers, the other with dinosaur stickers. Hauled flats of tomato plants for Martha's garden, Christmas trees, and furniture for my newlywed children. Now, it just hauled me. A solitary old man, a sack of potatoes, and fishing gear for trips I took less and less often. The truck was a monument to an era when I was needed, when I was the axle around which my small universe turned. The screen lit up. Sarah, my daughter. My heart gave a familiar, practiced lurch, a mix of fatherly affection and the reflexive tension of a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. What was it this time? The dishwasher on the fritz? Did the grandkids need a ride home from school? Or did Kevin need my socket set again, the one he always borrowed and never returned? "Hi, Dad." Her voice was artificially bright, the kind of cheerful tone news anchors use right before they tell you about a 10-car pileup on the interstate. It was her good news mask, a flimsy disguise I'd learned to see through years ago. "Hey, honey. How are you? How are the little ones?" I asked, watching a gray stray cat confidently cross my lawn. It didn't need an invitation. "Oh, we're just great. You won't believe it. Jake scored his first goal in practice. And Emily—" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Just a tiny beat of silence, but to me, it sounded like ice cracking under my feet. She always started with a breathless update on the grandkids when she was about to deliver bad news. It was her smokescreen. I said nothing. 30 years in the fire service teaches you the most important rule of survival. When the building starts groaning, you don't run around yelling. You stand still, and you listen. You figure out which beam is about to come down on your head. I let her have the floor. "Dad, the reason I'm calling. Kevin and I were talking about Thanksgiving." There it was, that quiet, ominous creak of a load-bearing wall. I remembered last Thanksgiving. Their house, packed to the gills with her friends and Kevin's family. The noise, the chaos, the crying kids. I'd shown up 3 days early, fixed the leaky faucet under their kitchen sink, assembled the new gas grill Kevin had given up on, reset their Wi-Fi router, and then spent all of Thanksgiving afternoon carving the turkey because Kevin claimed the sight of a raw bird made him queasy. I was useful. I was a function. And we decided this year, to make it a super low-key thing, she continued, picking her words as carefully as if she were walking through a minefield. Just us. Kevin's been so stressed at work, just a brutal year. He just wants to decompress. Without all the fuss, the cooking for 20 people, the company. I stared at the oak tree. It had to be 100 years old. Its roots ran deep, and it had seen generations come and go. It didn't care about the wind or the frost, or whether it was invited to the party. It just was. I'd spent my life trying to be that steady. I was beginning to think I'd failed. "I see," I said. 2 words. They were meant to be a period at the end of a sentence. A signal. Save what's left of your dignity, kid, and don't keep going. But she either didn't get it, or decided the patient needed more anesthesia before the cut. "Yeah, we're just going to grab a pre-cooked turkey from the store, whip up some instant mashed potatoes, and that's it. Nothing special, really. We just didn't want you to go to all the trouble, driving across town in all that holiday traffic." Trouble. The word stung like a splinter under a nail. Me. The man who'd driven through a blizzard on Christmas Eve because his granddaughter had a fever. The man who'd spent a week sleeping on their couch to watch their neurotic cat while they vacationed in Cancun. The man who had hauled a 10-foot-long dining table from a warehouse in his F-150 because their trendy, minimalist one couldn't accommodate all of Kevin's important relatives. And besides, here came the final nail in the coffin of my invitation. Kevin's mom is coming into town, Joan, and she gets overwhelmed by big crowds. It's just too much for her. Joan, the woman whose smile never ever reached her eyes, the woman who sized me up at every gathering as if I were a piece of secondhand furniture at a yard sale, the woman who, at my own grandson's birthday party, had said to a friend just loud enough for me to hear, "It's amazing how some men can work with their hands their whole lives and never learn the simple things, like that a flannel shirt isn't appropriate for a family celebration." I had just come from a fishing trip to make it in time. I'd brought my grandson the spinning reel he'd been begging for. Joan had given him another soulless electronic gadget, so that was it. My flannel shirt, my calloused hands, my face that didn't know how to feign interest in stock portfolios. I was the big crowd that overwhelmed the delicate sensibilities of Joan. I was, as Sarah would later call it, the toxicity. "I understand completely, Sarah," I said. And this time, there was a hint of steel in my voice. "You guys have a good, quiet holiday." "Oh, Dad, please don't be upset." Her voice suddenly became pleading, but the falseness was still there, thin and brittle. What could I say? That upset was too small a word for the slow, crushing pressure in my chest, that it felt like being the last man out of a burning building, only to have the door locked behind you by the people you'd just saved. That they were now telling you they just needed to air the place out? Why would I be upset? You're a family. You get to decide how you spend your holidays. There was a brief silence on her end. In the background, I heard Kevin's voice clear as day. "So? Did he buy it?" Sarah shushed him. Then her voice returned to the phone, loud and chipper again. "That's great, Daddy. I knew you'd understand. You're the best. We'll call you on Thursday for sure. Love you. Bye." The line went dead. Love you. The words felt like a blank fired from a starter pistol. All noise, no impact. I set the phone down on the chipped wooden table. The coffee in my mug was now a black, icy sludge. I sat in the rocker, its creaking counting out the first few seconds of my new status. Exile. This wasn't the quiet, dignified loneliness that had settled in after Martha passed. A loneliness filled with memory. This was something else. This was erasure. It wasn't just being forgotten, it was being actively deleted, like a faulty line of code. I pushed myself up. My old knees protested with a loud crack. I walked inside. In the dim light of the living room, something on the mantelpiece caught the light, my old helmet. My MSA Cairns, 1010, blackened by soot, with a deep gash on the side from a falling beam, and a small dent in the front from a door kicked in too hard. On the leather front shield, the faded number 12, and the name Callahan. Station 12. 30 years of my life. Hundreds of fires, dozens of lives saved, things that couldn't be measured in stock options or the appropriateness of a flannel shirt. I walked over and ran my hand over its surface. My fingers felt the cool plastic and the gritty texture of soot that had been baked in decades ago. This soot was real. It smelled of danger, adrenaline, and brotherhood. It was proof that I had existed, that I had mattered. A bitter, poisonous thought snaked its way into my mind. If I'd known that in my old age I'd go from being the foundation of the family to a piece of furniture they wanted to put in storage, I'd have bought myself a boat, not helped them buy a house. I swallowed. I'd always swallowed. Avoided fights, kept the peace, gave in for the sake of the family. I'd been silent for years, but I realized it then. You can swallow your pride. You can't swallow your own non-existence. The night was long and restless, like a watch during a hurricane. I tossed and turned in my old bed, the same bed where Martha had taken her last breath, and listened as the house carried on its nightly conversation with the wind. The floorboards creaked, the chimney moaned, and a loose shutter on the attic window tapped out a lonely rhythm. And I lay there, staring at a ceiling where the shadows of the oak branches danced like ghouls, while my past staged a full-scale assault. It wasn't self-pity. It was the cold, hard audit of a life's ledger, only to find that all my assets had been written off as bad debt. Memory isn't a film you can rewind. It's a furnace. And that night, some invisible hand was shoveling coal into it, making a lifetime of sacrifices glow white-hot. The first flare-up, 1998. The smell of turpentine and paper in Sarah's college art studio. She stood before me, thin and pale, her eyes wide with panic. The graphic design program was costing more than we'd ever imagined, and her brilliant boyfriend, Kevin, the future titan of tech, had just been laid off from his first real job. "Dad, I think I'm going to have to take a semester off," she'd mumbled, picking at a thread on her sleeve. "Get a job at the coffee shop. I can finish later. Maybe." I could see her dream cracking right down the middle. That weekend, I put a for sale sign on my boat. The Silver Streak, my pride and joy. A small aluminum fishing boat with a nearly new Johnson motor. I'd bought it with what we called blood money at the station. Compensation for an on-the-job injury. A broken leg and 3 cracked ribs. Martha and I had dreamed of retiring, hitching that boat to the F-150, and disappearing up to the lakes in Maine. We'd fish for trout, drink beer on the water at sunset, and just be quiet together. Quiet was our best language. The guy who bought it, a stout man in a brewery cap, slapped me on the back as he counted out the cash. "Bet it breaks your heart to sell her, old-timer. She's a beaut." I watched him hook my Silver Streak up to his shiny new SUV. "Nah," I lied, my mouth suddenly dry. "Tired of the waves. Figured fishing from the bank is more my speed these days. Getting old." That evening, I handed Sarah a thick white envelope. $6,000 in cash. She looked from the money to my face, and her own face crumpled. She sobbed into my chest, into my smoky, worn jacket. "Dad, how can I ever pay you back? This was your dream." "You don't," I said, stroking her hair. "Your diploma in a frame on the wall. That's all the payment I'll ever need, kiddo." She graduated. With honors. That diploma is hanging in her home office today, in an expensive mahogany frame. And down at the lake, there's still an empty spot, at the old dock where my dream used to be tied up. The furnace roared hotter. A new image surfaced. 2005. The smell of new paint and sawdust. Sarah and Kevin, married now, were buying their first house. The same house where Joan was currently being protected from my toxic presence. Their savings covered almost everything, except for the down payment. Kevin was walking around like a thundercloud, muttering about predatory lenders and the injustice of the system. I saw the familiar fear in Sarah's eyes. That was the year I basically moved into Station 12. Captain Callahan. I took every shift I could get. Doubles, overnights, holidays, Christmas, New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving. The other guys were desperate to get home to their families, to their kids. I stayed. My family was there, a brotherhood of tired, cynical men who smelled of smoke and sweat. I remember the taste of burnt coffee and stale pizza on a cardboard box at 3 a.m. I remember endless games of gin rummy under a flickering fluorescent light. I remember the exhaustion that seeped so deep. It felt like it was in my bone marrow. But I'd look at the growing number in my savings account and think, this is for Sarah. This is for her house. For her peace of mind. I transferred $20,000 to their account with a single click on a website. No promissory note, no conditions. I didn't tell them it was funded by sleep deprivation and vending machine dinners. Men don't send invoices for doing their duty. They just pay it. Another shovelful of coal into the fire. Kevin. Specifically, Kevin's cars. He had a taste for used luxury cars that started falling apart the day after the warranty expired. I was his free, on-call mechanic for life. How many Saturdays had I spent on the cold concrete of his pristine garage, my head under the hood of some German or American lemon? My hands, calloused and scarred from axes and rescue tools, were perpetually covered in grease and oil. Kevin would usually stand nearby, in his clean jeans, scrolling on his phone. "Mike, you're a magician," he'd say with a chuckle. "I don't know the first thing about all this iron. It's a mystery to me." It wasn't magic. It was dirty, frustrating work. And while I was contorted into a pretzel, trying to loosen a rusted bolt, he'd be telling me about the new golf clubs he was buying with the money he'd saved on shop fees. And I stayed quiet. I stubbornly believed this was what family was. Helping. Not expecting anything in return. But I missed a key distinction. There's a line between helping and being used, and I'd let it get erased years ago. Against this smoky backdrop of sacrifice, memory pulled out a completely different slide. A bright, clean image. Sharp as a cutting torch. Station 12. It wasn't a job, it was a tribe. We weren't bound by blood. We were bound by fire. We went into hell together, and we pulled each other out. We shared the last cigarette, a mug of bitter coffee, and the heavy silence after a bad call. When Pete Sanders, a young firefighter, had his house burned down, the irony was lost on no one. The entire off-duty shift showed up that weekend. We had a new roof on by Sunday evening. No one logged their hours. No one asked for pay. You just showed up with your tools and a thermos. When I was laid up with pneumonia from a chemical fire, the guys made a schedule. One day, a guy would drop off a pot of his wife's chicken soup. The next, another would come by and fix the running toilet I'd been ignoring. A third would just sit with me and tell bad jokes to keep my spirits up. They didn't use fancy words. They just did. They had my six. It was the unwritten law of the brotherhood. And there, in the darkness of my bedroom, with the old house groaning around me, I finally saw the chasm. The vast, unbridgeable gap between my two families. One took my sacrifices as their due and paid me back with erasure. The other asked for nothing, but gave everything, and remembered every scar. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, surgical clarity. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier who'd been fighting hard and long to defend the wrong fort. It was time to return to my own garrison. where they still remembered my name. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The wind was dying down. The sky to the east was turning a pale, washed-out gray, promising a cold but clear day. I no longer felt crushed. I felt the first stirrings of a plan, a simple plan, a man's plan, a just plan. The next couple of days were lived in a thick gray fog. I tried to go through the motions of my retirement routine. I replaced a rotted board on the back fence, spent an afternoon in the garage sorting nuts and bolts into old coffee cans. I even drove the F-150 out to the lake and sat with a line in the water for an hour. But it was all just pantomime. My hands were busy, but my mind was stuck, replaying that phone call on an endless, torturous loop. The condescending tone. Kevin's voice in the background. The name Joan. I kept telling myself it was just hurt feelings, a bruise that would fade. But it wasn't fading. It was hardening into a cold, heavy lump in my chest. Then, on Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving, the phone rang again. This time, the screen read, Mark. My son. If Sarah was a master of the velvet-gloved manipulation, Mark was a sledgehammer. He had my directness without any of my sentimentality, mixed with the cutthroat business sense of his generation. Dad, hey, he started. No preamble. Sarah told me you're up to speed on the plan for tomorrow. Good. Listen, I need to talk to you. It's important. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table. The kitchen, which for 30 years had smelled of Martha's baking, cinnamon and apples, now just smelled like old wood and disinfectant. I'm listening, I said, feeling the muscles in my back tighten. Okay, so here's the deal. Kevin is looking to scale his business. Some kind of IT consulting, cloud services, all that new economy crap. He says it's a golden opportunity. But to make the jump, he needs seed money. A significant amount. He went to the bank, but those sharks want major collateral. I was silent. I looked down at my hands on the table. Hands with dirt permanently etched into the lines of my knuckles, with calluses that never went away. Hands that had built, fixed, and saved. I knew what was coming. It was that feeling you get at a fire scene, when you walk into a smoky room and see a faint, oily sheen on the floor. It means someone spilled an accelerant. It means the whole place is about to go up. So, they were brainstorming. Mark paused for dramatic effect. And well, you remember your share of the money from selling the old house, yours and Mom's. It's just sitting in your savings account, Dad. It's dead money. You don't use it, you live simply. But for Kevin and Sarah, this is a real chance. A chance to finally get ahead, to secure the grandkids' future. Your grandkids, Dad. Dead money. $50,000. All that was left after a lifetime of work, a mortgage, and losing my wife. My only safety net. My rainy day fund. My guarantee that I wouldn't have to come to them, hat in hand, to pay for a new roof or a heart surgery. What, exactly, do you want from me, Mark? I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. Well, to avoid all the red tape. You know, loans and co-signing. The cleanest way to do it would be if you just gifted them the money. Sign a gift letter. You see? It would be your investment in the family's future. In your grandkids. Imagine how grateful they'd be. They'd worship you, Dad. Gifted. The word hit me like a physical blow. So simple. Not a loan. Not an investment. A gift. As if I was supposed to hand over the last thing I had on earth in exchange for the fictional gratitude of the very people who had just deemed me unworthy of a plate of turkey. The humiliation was piling on top of humiliation, layer after layer, like soot from a slow, smoldering fire. I'll have to think about it, I managed to say. It was the biggest lie I'd told in a decade. I wasn't going to think about it for a single second. Dad, what's there to think about? Mark's voice turned sharp with impatience. This is for family. It's not for some stranger. We're your own blood. Kevin said if you help them out, he'd even be willing to bring you on in an honorary capacity. Like a safety consultant or something. You could have a desk at the office, drink coffee, give advice. A safety consultant. Me. A fire captain who knew from brutal first-hand experience how different plastics burn, how gas cylinders explode, and how to evacuate a panicked crowd from a shopping mall. They were offering me a handout, a sinecure, a pathetic little title so I wouldn't feel completely fleeced. This second blow wasn't aimed at my heart. It was a gut punch aimed squarely at my manhood. I said, I'll think about it, Mark, I repeated, and hit the in-call button before he could argue further. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, unable to move. If the first blow was an emotional knockout, this was them trying to pick my pockets while I was down on the canvas. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd written me off as a depreciated asset, and now they were trying to liquidate me for cash. And just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, the floor fell out. I rarely used my laptop, but something compelled me to power it on. Facebook, the account Mark had set up for me years ago, telling me, this way you can see pictures of the grandkids and not be a total dinosaur, Dad. I navigated to Sarah's page, and I saw it. A post from just a couple of hours earlier. A bright, heavily filtered photo. Sarah, a beaming Kevin, and the two grandkids in their holiday best. They were all hugging in their immaculate, magazine-perfect living room. And below the picture, the caption, "Final preparations for our cozy, intimate Thanksgiving. So important to realize who your real family is. The people who support you, value you, and love you unconditionally. This year we made the important decision to protect our peace and cut out all the excess toxicity from our lives. Just the closest circle. Just positive vibes. Grutter blessed Stewart family. First setting boundaries." There were already dozens of likes and comments. "You go, girl. Boundaries are everything. Such a beautiful family. Happy holidays to you all. Enjoy the peace and quiet. Cut out all the excess toxicity." That was me. It was public. It was a proclamation. For their hundreds of friends and acquaintances to see, I had been officially branded. I wasn't just an afterthought. I was hazardous waste that had been properly disposed of before the party. I stared at their smiling, counterfeit faces. I stared at the lie, so proudly displayed. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It was a loud, clean, sharp sound, like an old, dry bone breaking. It was the point of no return. All the pain, all the resentment, all the bitterness I had compressed deep inside me for years, instantly crystallized into a single, cold, diamond-hard resolve. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to get revenge. Revenge is an emotional, messy business. A fireman on a call has no room for emotion. He acts. Calmly, methodically, effectively. You don't fight an electrical fire with water. You cut the power. You don't just fight the flames. You cut off the oxygen. I stood up slowly. I walked to the fireplace and picked up my old faithful helmet. I ran my thumb over its scars. I was no longer a ghost in someone else's house. I was no longer a victim, and I sure as hell wasn't a toxic element. I was Captain Michael Callahan of Station 12, and I finally knew exactly what I was doing for Thanksgiving. The decision didn't form in my head. It bloomed in my gut, where instinct lives. It was simple, clear, and felt as right as rain after a long drought. If one family thinks you're trash, you go to the one that thinks you're a legend. You go to the family where your worth was measured not by your wallet, but by your courage. In my worn-out, coffee-stained address book, I found the number for Station 12. My finger dialed the numbers with a will of its own. A young, unfamiliar voice answered on the second ring. Station 12, Dispatcher Rodriguez speaking. Rodriguez, I said, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. This is Captain Callahan. Get Ricky Diaz on the phone for me. I heard a click, the sound of footsteps, a muffled voice shouting, Captain, it's Callahan for you. A moment later, a familiar booming voice was on the line. Mike, what wind blew you in, you old fox? Haven't heard from you in a dog's age. You doing okay? The bones not creaking too loud? Ricky Diaz. I remembered him as a scared 20-year-old kid who was terrified of heights, but would climb a 100-foot ladder in a gale because I told him to. I was his mentor. Now, he was the captain. Bones are fine, Ricky. They only creak on schedule. Listen up, I've got a business proposition. Your crew is on duty tomorrow, right? The whole shift? You know it. Holidays are our harvest season. Deep fryers, turkeys in the oven, faulty Christmas lights. They burn hotter than a politician's conscience. We're on high alert. Why? Missing the smell of smoke? I'm missing the smell of real food. What are you guys planning on eating tomorrow? That cardboard pizza from Dominic's again? Or gas station burritos? Diaz roared with laughter. You nailed it, Cap. One or the other. No time or talent for anything else. Our station oven has only ever seen frozen lasagna. Scrub the burritos, I commanded, using the tone I reserved for Mayday calls. The tone that didn't invite questions. Tomorrow, you and your crew are having dinner. A real Thanksgiving dinner. I'm talking a turkey so big, you'll think it's a pterodactyl. I'm talking cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce from scratch, sweet potato casserole, mashed potatoes with real cream, and 2 pumpkin pies. All I need from you is empty tables, hungry firefighters, and a fresh pot of coffee. I'll handle the rest. The silence on the other end was so profound I could hear the big clock ticking on the station wall. Mike, are you serious? Why would you go to all that trouble? Because that's how it's done, Captain, I said, putting emphasis on his title. Because a family is supposed to eat together. Expect me around 1800 hours. And tell your guys to save room for dessert. I hung up before he could ask more questions or start thanking me. The plan was in motion. I felt a surge of adrenaline I hadn't felt since I'd turned in my badge. It was the energy of purpose. On Thanksgiving morning, I was up at 5, no alarm needed. I put on my old faded jeans and my favorite flannel shirt, the infamous, inappropriate one, and got in my truck. The F-150 rumbled to life on the first try, as if it, too, understood the mission. The supermarket was just opening its doors, and I was one of the first customers inside. I pushed a cart through the empty aisles with the focus of a commander studying a battlefield map. Turkey. The biggest one they had. A 25-pound monster. A sack of russet potatoes. 2 kinds of sweet potatoes. Brussels sprouts, which I planned to roast with bacon. Celery, onions, carrots. The holy trinity of any good stock. Fresh sage, thyme, and rosemary for the stuffing. Flour, butter, heavy cream, cans of pumpkin puree. The arsenal for the pies. Fresh and frozen cranberries for the sauce. I loaded the cart and then the bed of the pickup, with the methodical ambition of a man preparing for a long, happy siege. All day long, my kitchen was my command center. I put on an old Creedence Clearwater Revival album, and with John Fogerty's voice filling the house, I waged a glorious, one-man culinary war. The smells mingled, creating a symphony of comfort that chased the ghosts of loneliness out of every corner. It smelled of sizzling onions and garlic, of herbs and spices, and later, of cinnamon and nutmeg. It smelled like my childhood home. It smelled like Martha's kitchen. And as I cooked, I wasn't thinking of Sarah, Kevin, or Joan. I was thinking of my guys, of young Rodriguez, who was probably missing his mother's cooking, of Diaz, with the weight of the station on his shoulders, of old Pat O'Malley, who was retired, but would absolutely show up at the station to check on the kids and score a free holiday meal. This wasn't just cooking. This was a sacrament. I did everything the old-fashioned way, the way my mother had taught me. I slathered the turkey in an ungodly amount of herb butter. I made the stuffing from a pan of cornbread I'd baked the day before, adding sausage and apples. I mashed the potatoes by hand with a ricer, whipping in hot cream and more butter than any doctor would approve of, until they were as light as a cloud. I baked 2 massive, perfectly orange pumpkin pies, and their spicy aroma filled the entire house. I wasn't just making food. I was pouring all my respect, my unspent affection, and the love that had been rejected by its intended recipients right into those pots and pans. By 5 o'clock, it was all done. I packed the hot food into large insulated carriers I kept in the garage from my years of organizing Firehouse picnics. I loaded the heavy containers into the truck bed. The box with the pies was placed gently on the passenger seat. And next to it, on the floor, I put my old helmet. It was riding shotgun, my silent, honored guest. When my F-150 pulled up to Station 12, the big bay doors were already rolled open. Ricky Diaz was standing there, and when he saw my truck, his face split into a grin. At his signal, the entire on-duty shift, a dozen strong, poured out into the driveway. Young, loud, strapping guys. They surrounded the truck and began unloading the containers with a reverence usually reserved for religious relics, passing them from hand to hand. We set up in the common room, on the long, scarred table that had seen more grief and laughter than any priest's confessional. I placed the turkey in the center, golden brown, glistening, and immense. It looked like a king on its throne. Around it, we placed mountains of mashed potatoes, platters of bright orange sweet potatoes, and bowls of caramelized Brussels sprouts. The smell in the room was so thick and wonderful that even the dispatcher's radio seemed to fall silent in awe. The guys gathered around the table, loud, hungry, alive. Ricky Diaz stood up, holding a plastic cup of apple cider. "All right, guys, listen up," he yelled, and the room quieted. "Tonight, we're thankful for a lot of things, but mostly, we're thankful for him, for our retired captain, Mike Callahan. He didn't just bring us dinner, he brought us a holiday. He reminded us what this brotherhood is really about. Mike, this table is yours. First word, and the first cut, belong to you." All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly. I hadn't prepared a speech. I just looked at their faces. Young faces, old faces, tired faces, eager faces. The faces of men I would trust with my life. "Thanks, Captain," I said, nodding to Diaz. "I was never much for speeches. You know that. But they say a man has 2 families in his life. The one he's born into, and the one he's forged in fire. I'm damn glad to be eating with my family tonight. Now let's eat before this bird gets cold." A roar of approval went up. Chairs scraped, and the clatter of silverware filled the room. I took the big carving knife, and it slid into the turkey with a satisfying crunch. I took my seat, put a slice of breast meat on my plate, and at that moment, surrounded by the noise, the laughter, and the steady, comforting hum of a working firehouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was needed. I was respected. I was home. That dinner at Station 12 was everything Thanksgiving is supposed to be. It was loud, messy, and profoundly grateful. Young firefighters argued over the merits of white meat versus dark meat. An old-timer told a joke I'd heard 100 times, but everyone laughed like it was the first time. We ate with the ferocity of men who burn calories for a living, with pure, unadulterated joy. My helmet sat on the windowsill like a silent guardian, its scarred surface catching the glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. I wasn't a guest or a charity case. I was where I belonged. I was Captain Callahan, breaking bread with his crew. Here, no one was judging me. Here, my calloused hands were a badge of honor, not a social faux pas. As the meal wound down and the men leaned back in their chairs, groaning in contentment, I started clearing plates alongside them. Young Rodriguez, the dispatcher, came over to me with a look of awe on his face. "Captain," he said, handing me a fresh mug of coffee. "That was the best Thanksgiving I've ever had. I'm not kidding. Don't tell my mom, but your stuffing was better than hers. Thank you for all of this." He said it simply, looking me straight in the eye. And that one, honest thank you, from a kid young enough to be my grandson, held more weight than all the hollow I love yous I'd heard over the phone. Then, something happened that I could never have predicted. Rodriguez, a true child of the digital age, decided that this moment needed to be shared. He took out his phone and snapped a few pictures. The feast-laden table, me surrounded by the grinning crew, my helmet keeping watch from the windowsill, and he posted it to the Station 12 official Facebook page. A page with several thousand followers, which was basically the entire population of our small town. The caption he wrote was simple, but it hit with the force of a high-pressure hose. "This Thanksgiving, we're thankful for a quiet night in the city. But mostly, we're thankful for men like this. Our legendary retired captain, Michael Callahan, found out his own family had uninvited him from their table. So what did he do? He came to his other family. He showed up at his old station and cooked a feast fit for kings for the entire on-duty shift. Captain, just so you know, Station 12 will always be your home, and we will always be your family. Thank you for a lesson in true dignity, honor, and brotherhood, and for the best damn pumpkin pie west of the Mississippi." I didn't find out about the post until the next morning, when my old flip phone, usually silent for hours at a time, started buzzing like a hornet's nest. Calls and texts poured in. Old colleagues I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, guys from my old fishing club. The message was always the same. "Mike, you're the man. Just saw the post. So proud of you, buddy. Your family doesn't deserve you, my friend." I hadn't been looking for sympathy or public vindication, but damn it if it didn't feel good. It felt like a warm blanket on a cold night knowing you weren't invisible. Then, around noon, she called. Sarah. Her voice, so full of manufactured sweetness 2 days earlier, was now shaking with a toxic cocktail of tears and rage. "Dad, what have you done? How could you humiliate us like this, in front of the entire town? Do you have any idea what people are writing to me and Kevin? The memes they're making with our family picture. Kevin's business partners are sending him links to that post. You've ruined our reputation." I sat on my porch, in my rocking chair, and listened to her tirade. But this time, I didn't feel small or hurt. I felt a calm detachment, like a judge listening to a rambling, nonsensical closing argument. "I didn't do anything, Sarah. I said when she finally paused to breathe. My voice was as calm and flat as the lake on a windless day. I cooked dinner for my friends, the same way I cooked dinner for you and your family for 30 years. The thing that humiliated you wasn't my post. It was your post. The one where you wrote about cutting out toxic people. You're not ashamed of what I did. You're ashamed because the truth, the one you tried to hide, finally came out, and it turns out it's an ugly truth. But you could have just been quiet. You could have just sucked it up, like you always do, she shrieked, her voice cracking. I was quiet, honey. I was quiet for 20 years. I was quiet when I sold my boat to pay for your degree. I was quiet when I worked double shifts to fund your down payment. I was quiet when I was up to my elbows in grease fixing your husband's car. Well, he couldn't even be bothered to say thank you. I was quiet when his mother insulted me in my own home. I swallowed so much silence, it started to poison me from the inside out. And yesterday, I just decided to fill that empty space. Not with anger or revenge, but with the gratitude of people who actually appreciate it. A dead silence fell on the line. I could hear her ragged, hitching breaths. What are we supposed to do now? She whispered. It was the first honest question she had asked me in years. You live with it, Sarah, I replied. You figure out how to live with it. But I want to be clear about something. My other services are no longer available. The Bank of Dad is no longer issuing interest-free loans or gifts. The free-of-charge auto repair and home maintenance shop is closed for business permanently. And the 24/7 emotional support hotline is no longer accepting calls at this number. But the door to my house, that's still open, just in case you ever remember what respect feels like, instead of just what it can get you. I ended the call. I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd just put up a checkpoint with a very strict set of rules for entry. An hour later, Mark called. His voice was quiet, subdued, almost unrecognizable. Dad, I saw the post. I read the comments. I talked to Sarah. She told me everything, about the money too. Dad, we were wrong. I was wrong. I'm sorry. The word sorry sounded so foreign coming from him that for a second I thought I'd misheard. I'm glad you see that, son. That was all we said. But it was enough. It wasn't forgiveness. We were a long way from that. But it was the first stone being laid for a new foundation. Or at least, an acknowledgement that the old one had rotted through and collapsed. I finished my cold coffee and looked at my faithful F-150. A thought, clean and sharp and free, cut through my mind for the first time in years. I should take a drive up the coast, look at some new boats, and the thought didn't come with a shadow of guilt. It was mine, and mine alone. The phone rang one last time. It was Ricky Diaz, his voice booming with excitement. Mike, you're not going to believe this. Word of your Thanksgiving feast got around. The local Veterans Association, the guys from the VFW, they're putting on a big Christmas dinner for the Vietnam and Afghanistan vets. And they sent me on a mission to ask if the legendary Captain Callahan would be willing to run the kitchen. I smiled, a real smile, one that started deep inside and reached my eyes. Tell them the captain is reporting for duty, I said. I had a mission again. I had a purpose. And I had a brotherhood. Let the cold November winds scatter the ashes of old wounds. From the embers that remained, you could still build a new fire. A bright one. A warm one. A fire that would burn for a long, long time.